everybody. This is Emily with MeatRx, and today I have a fellow Lion Diet. You see my lion? Lion Diet. Lion Dieter with me. This is Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Emily.
And we met through Lion Diet, and eating just beef and salt and water. And found out that he has an incredible carnivore story. So we just wanted to cover that for you guys today. So Brian, tell me a little bit about what it was like before you started eating carnivore.
Sure. So to try to make a really long story relatively short, my whole life up until a few years ago, I was eating a standard American diet. I never considered myself to be particularly unhealthy. I was never substantially overweight. I never had any serious health issues or anything like that. However, come October of 2016, seemingly overnight, my world got turned upside down by developing some sort of idiopathic illness. So I say seemingly overnight because my theory now is that after 23 or 22 years of eating suboptimally, my immune system finally probably just crashed. But then I developed an illness, as I said, that consisted of symptoms such as excruciating headaches, debilitating fatigue, muscle pain, joint pain, chest pain, heart palpitations, digestion issues, separate abdominal pain. I mean, the list goes on, trouble sleeping, all sorts of stuff. So I saw quite a few doctors locally, and nobody could find anything wrong. And then eventually, after seeing so many doctors here, I was referred up to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. So I went up there, so many tests done, and still no definitive results on anything, which in a way was relieving because they weren't finding like a terminal cancer or something like that. But at the same time was also incredibly frustrating because I had all these symptoms and felt awful basically 24/7 and had no explanation for it. So not only were the physical symptoms awful, but the psychological symptoms that then came along with that, the depression, the anxiety, just from not knowing what was going on. And especially from, relatively speaking, being a pretty healthy, or I thought at the time, healthy young guy, to all of a sudden, I mean, there were days I couldn't get out of bed, which was so not normal for me, because I was pretty active and generally pretty energetic. So to go from that to just the complete opposite, yeah, it sucked.
That had to have been so scary.
Yeah, it was. And my mom is in the healthcare field, and she was obviously worried anyway, just because she's a mom. But to go through that whole process and to not be finding out anything, I think was particularly concerning. And my dad was a paramedic his whole life, and I'm sure it probably sucked for him to also see his son going through that. So anyway, when I was finished at the Mayo Clinic, the prognosis was, hopefully this will just get better with time. And it was like, yeah, let's hope. And I should also say that I was offered medication throughout the process of this to try to help with symptoms. But because I'm stubborn and because I don't like taking medication if I don't have to, especially when they don't even really know what the problem is, I was like, no, thanks. And it's also interesting because my mom is a pharmacist. So like looking back, it's sort of funny that like, even though that's her whole gig, the whole time I was like, nope, don't give me medication. But anyway, so I thought, well, what else, like what other factors do I have control over that I could try to manipulate to maybe try to feel better? And the first one I thought of was exercise, which I'd always kind of done. I mean, nothing crazy, but obviously when you're feeling like crap all the time, it can be pretty hard to have the energy, first of all, but just also the motivation to exercise. So then the other one was diet. And a lot of us in this space have probably become familiar with the dark corners of the internet archives, like trying to research, different diets, different methods. Okay, like what can I try to do to make myself feel better? And at first, I think it was 2017, I tried a few months of gluten-free, And personally, I didn't find any difference in my symptoms. Some people say that they feel better. I personally didn't really notice a difference. And then for a few months in 2018, I tried plant-based, which actually made my symptoms worse. So
Wow.
yeah, and it sucks too, because the idea of it, I suppose, is kind of nice, and I thought, based on, what you hear all the time, that eating plants is supposed to be healthy for you. But subjectively and pragmatically, when it was implemented, it made me feel worse. So I was like, well, regardless of what the guidelines are, obviously it's not working for me. So luckily, in late 2018, I was listening to Dr. Jordan Peterson just for his other work, but I came across a podcast that he was doing with Joe Rogan, and he talked about how he and his daughter both had autoimmune issues, pretty severe ones too, and they essentially healed them just by switching diet and by going carnivore. And in their case, it wasn't the term at the time, but going lion diet, so beef, salt, water. So early 2019, February, a year ago now, is when I decided to go all in, and I went strict because I had done a lot of research then after I first found out about carnivore, and found out other people that were sort of starting to enter the space that still did things like any animal products, like dairy, eggs, things like that. But just for the sake of trying, and for like elimination diet purposes, I just stayed strictly beef, salt, water. And I had an adaptation period for probably like 2 weeks or so, which just really consisted of like headaches and fatigue, which, by the way, I hadn't known about like electrolyte supplementation at the time. So had I known, it probably would have even been less. But I had already been experiencing fatigue and headaches like this whole time anyway. So the fact that I just sort of had the faith or whatever that, okay, it's normal, you just have to get through that. And it seriously was. It was almost like one night into the next, it was like a switch flipped. And I don't know if it was because I became fat adapted or what exactly was going on biologically, but all of a sudden it was like, whew, I felt so different. And then I think, listening to other people's stories, I was pretty fortunate in that I noticed pretty significant results quickly. I would say within the first month or two, almost all of those symptoms that I mentioned earlier went away. And that was, I mean, to say life-changing is an understatement. I mean, I couldn't believe it really, especially considering how it was just by changing diet, I mean, it's like we're told all this stuff about what you're supposed to eat to be healthy. And then to sort of go like against the grain of everything that you're recommended to do, and then to feel better. I mean, it was crazy. And, well, I'm grateful that I came across it. But yeah, it was great. And then not only were my symptoms going away, which would have been plenty, but my body composition improved too. And I was able to start having energy to exercise again. And even to this day, I don't do a whole lot. I mean, it's just like 15, 30 minutes of like body weight exercises. And personally, I think I keep myself in pretty good shape. But anyway, it was, even besides that, it was just the fact from going from such a low place of feeling awful all the time to getting it back, it was like, oh, praise the Lord.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is significant, because like you were talking about the transition phase, and for people who already are so sick, the
Mhm.
transition phase is just like another pile of horrible. Like,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was
like I've
honestly a breeze compared to some of the other stuff I went through. I was like, and again, I was lucky that I had heard other people that had started doing it that said, expect this. Because I think a lot of people maybe get discouraged when they first start trying and they're like, oh my God, I feel awful. This obviously isn't working. It's like, no. Like, I get that it's hard, but like stick with it, because there is another side to it. And when you get to that other side, at least in my case, and obviously yours and a lot of other people's, I mean, I got my life back. So
Yeah. And so I just know personally from me knowing your story, were you able to, with that elimination diet, were you able to reintroduce foods and see certain foods that you were reacting to, that
yeah,
you knew, okay,
yeah.
I did this science experiment and I know that I have a reaction to that food?
Yeah, and there were actually, I think a few months in, I actually tried introducing some non-carnivore stuff just out of curiosity to see like, okay, is this all in my head? I didn't think it was, but I'm curious. So yeah, I would try reintroducing vegetables. I tried reintroducing rice, and it was like every time I tried reintroducing something that was outside of that strict lion diet, essentially, my symptoms came back. And so, I mean, it is what it is, and I'm not a doctor or anything. I don't have the scientific explanation maybe as to explain why, but just from a layperson who is living in this body, that's what happened. So, that was enough for me. And I've been able to reintroduce some other carnivore foods. I feel best and like my most optimal when I'm just doing beef, salt, and water. But every now and then I'll have bacon because I love bacon. um, and sometimes I'll have chicken, but it's definitely not the same as just when I'm sticking with a good ribeye or a good steak.
Yes, absolutely. And then I don't remember, did you have skin problems for a little while as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my whole life, or at least like since I was a teenager, I'd have acne and things. And then actually one of the weird symptoms that, from what I can remember, started when I went through all that starting in October of 2016 was I would get hives, like random hives that didn't really have an explanation. And those have gotten better. Sometimes I'll still get them actually, funnily enough, like when I'm out in the cold. So I don't know if that's a separate thing or if it's related. But in terms of like acne and other rashes and stuff, that actually went away just by switching to the lion diet.
That's awesome. And so has it been difficult for you to be on such a restrictive thing like the lion diet? Because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, that must be horrible for you that you can only eat beef. So has that been a struggle for you?
Personally, no. I understand that maybe that might be unique to me just because I actually try to simplify my life as much as I can anyway. So like the simpler the better. I mean, I like having routines, it's so not, besides the fact that it's changed my life and made me feel better, which is totally good enough for me. I love how easy it is. It's like every single day I come home and it takes me 10 minutes to prepare a meal, and not every meal is satisfying. Every meal makes me feel good. And I know that at least personally, it's healthy for me, compared to what I was, it's like night and day. So no, for me, it hasn't been difficult sticking with it, but I get that, especially when in the culture we live in, we're so conditioned to having 1,000 options for everything. I get that a lot of people are hesitant to give that stuff up. And some of the people that have asked me questions about it, that's one of the frequent concerns that comes up is like, oh, well, how am I ever going to go without such and such? And it's like, I guess that's the choice you have to make. However, for people probably like us, that it's like, well, I can enjoy a donut and feel like crap, or have this other way of eating and feel my best. It's not really a choice. But besides the fact that I actually really enjoy steak, so I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. But
No,
yeah,
and I think that's a good point because yes, it is restrictive. Yes, it is definitely different. But man, I'm so glad that we have this option. I'm
me
so
too.
glad that we found this solution,
Yeah,
that I get to function.
yeah,
I mean, who cares about what
yeah,
I'm eating? I
yeah,
get to function. I get to come back to the life of the living,
yeah,
and I thought my life was over. And it sounds
yeah,
like, from talking to you, I know that you have had kind of the same uh, misery,
yeah,
just purely miserable.
yeah,
So it's worth it. And
yeah.
I'm
Well,
so grateful for people like Michaela Peterson and Sean Baker who are, giving us this solution, giving us this
yeah.
option and this information.
Yeah, well, that's another thing I try to remind people that have questions about this is that once you're doing this diet long enough, at least for me and others that I've talked to, the cravings actually go away. So people assume that like, oh my God, I'm only going to be able to eat this and I'm going to really want something else. I don't crave it anymore. And even when I go into the grocery store, it's right past every other thing and just, you know what I mean? So it doesn't mean that it might not be difficult at first, but once you pass that hump, At
Yeah.
least for me, it just isn't even an
It's
issue anymore.
it's crazy. It really is. And I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but do you have to tap into your willpower now?
Not really, no. And I mean, no, I don't.
It's
Like every
crazy.
now and
It's
then, like
crazy.
the idea of, I don't know, of having something might be nice, but to be honest, especially having gone through what I've gone through and knowing what I know now, it's just not worth it, you know? And I mean, it's weird too, and it's not coming from a place of judgment at all. But even when I'm just out and about, like in grocery stores or anywhere out in the public now, and I just see how many people seem to be in so much pain and seem to be hurting and seem to be overweight, and the fact that they really, and it sounds bad, but it's, I think most people just don't know better, you know what I mean?
They
So
don't.
yeah, so that's what's kind of sad, and that's what another thing of many that keeps me from going back down that route. It's because, and again, I've experimented. I'm like, well, just for the case of curiosity, let's see if I can try this again, and I couldn't, and it's not worth the pain and all that. So yeah,
Absolutely. Well, you have been a key component in my personal journey. I have really relied on you for your support for me personally. And I know that there are tons of other people that would benefit from reaching out to you and hearing your story. So thank you so much for doing this interview with me and for just being a part of the carnivore community and the Lion Diet community.
yeah.
Your story is amazing.
Well, right back at you. I mean, seriously, yeah. I remember when I first saw your testimony, it's awesome anytime you get to hear someone else's story that goes through something similarly to you. But then also when you meet someone that's as, I don't know, there's just something about you that I really
Aw,
seem to connect with, you know what I mean? And maybe it's just, you know, going through the trenches of this whole experience together in a sense. But that's what's so nice about doing these kinds of interviews and about social media, which I'm not a large contributor of, but this kind of stuff I'm all about. Anytime that people, especially that are going through pretty awful health issues like this, can come together and find solutions together, I mean, that's great. So
well, and I think you're right. I think it is, coming from the trenches.
mm,
You cut through everything else, and whenever you really come from the trenches of that physical and that mental misery,
yeah,
you can relate with people on a different level because you've been there,
yeah,
and that's
yeah.
really important. But thank you, Brian. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.